What's up, world? I'm Cameron McKinney, and this is Pop Culture Spotlight, a podcast about the movie Daddio. Here's a quick synopsis. A young woman shares a conversation with an older cab driver, and as the drive continues, the two begin to connect and share their past. The film stars Dakota Johnson and Sean Penn, standout performances. Sean Penn is the reason I wanted to watch this movie. As a young actor, he shared the screen with a lot of established legendary actors, Robert Duvall in Primary Colors, Christopher Walken in At Close Range, and now he's at the stage in his career where he's the elder statesman paired with a younger performer. I'll get into his performance in Daddio more in a second, but it's a great reminder as to why Sean Penn is regarded as one of the greats. What impresses me about Penn is he's an actor that is larger than the movies he's in. What I mean by that is there's not one movie you can think about when you look at his career, the way Pacino has The Godfather, De Niro has Taxi Driver, and Hoffman has The Graduate. When I think about Penn, I think of all his great scenes, the most famous example being in Clint Eastwood's Mystic River, where he breaks down when he finds out his daughter has been killed. Call it overacting all you want, I still find it brilliant. This next scene is not from a super popular movie, Brian De Palma's Casualties of War. It's the final confrontation between Penn's character and Michael J. Fox's. He basically just gives him a look that tells you all you need to know. There's a scene in his other movie with De Palma, Carlito's Way. It's the scene where Penn's sleazy lawyer brings Pacino on the boat and becomes a criminal himself. And lastly is a scene from State of Grace where Penn's undercover cop is on a subway with another cop played by John Turturro, and Penn wants out of his mission to take down a gang that includes his best friend. Penn's emotion in this scene is unreal. If you are a fan of Leonardo DiCaprio's performance in The Departed, you should definitely check out Penn in State of Grace. The other fascinating thing about Penn is his love-hate relationship with the profession of acting. Here's what he told Maureen Dowd of the New York Times, quote, "I went 15 years miserable on sets. I feel like an actor who's playing a leading role and is a known actor and is being paid well, has a leadership position on a film, and you've got to show up with the energy and be a bodyguard for the director in some way. I was faking my way through that stuff, and that was exhausting. Mostly what I thought was, what time is it? When are we going to get off?" End quote. Watching Sean Penn's passion on screen, it's almost impossible to believe that he feels that way about movies, but then I also think he's putting so much into every performance that it must have taken some toll on him. I personally will never take this particular actor for granted. He's an all-time great leading man. And if you're a fan of Sean Penn, you'll enjoy Penn in Daddio. He's given great dialogue, and what I like about the performances, there are moments where Penn brings his signature intensity and other scenes where he's being more subtle. I'm really excited for Penn's next movie, which is currently titled The Battle of Barkton Cross, which is written and directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, and we'll see Penn for the first time work with Leonardo DiCaprio, two of the best on screen together. That's what I watch movies for, to see actors like Sean Penn work with Leonardo DiCaprio. Let's talk about Penn's co-star in Daddio, Dakota Johnson. The way I look at Dakota Johnson's career is that it is eerily similar to that of Kristen Stewart. Both became well-known in popular movies. For Stewart, Twilight; for Johnson, 50 Shades of Grey. That, to put lightly, were not critical hits. And both have been really good to great in smaller movies that not a lot of people have seen. For Stewart, you have The Runaways, Camp X-Ray, and Clouds of Sils Maria. For Johnson, you have The Peanut Butter Falcon, Our Friend, and Cha-Cha Real Smooth. It just feels like that when these actresses work in big studio movies, they are not successful. Stewart had Charlie's Angels, and Johnson had Madam Web. But the perception of Kristen Stewart has changed lately because she got an Oscar nomination in a movie that a lot of people like me really enjoy, Spencer, and that's what Dakota Johnson needs to be. Great in a movie that is seen by many, and I felt like she came close with The Lost Daughter. Her next film may be the one. It's from Celine Song and co-stars Chris Evans and Pedro Pascal. Johnson, in my opinion, has already bounced back from Madam Web with her last two performances. First in Tig Notaro's Am I Okay?, where she plays a 30-something-year-old woman who learns she is a lesbian, and now with Daddio. And I was impressed by her performance in this movie because I think most of the good dialogue was given to the Sean Penn character. But Dakota Johnson's movie starness, if that makes any sense, really still does come out in a movie like this. I also just like the fact that this is the kind of movie Dakota Johnson wants to make. She wants to be in a movie like Daddio, and I respect that a lot. Daddio is a movie I very much enjoyed, but it's one that I don't think is for everyone because it's going to be hard for some people to believe that two strangers in modern times would have a conversation like this. My counterpoint would be it's a movie. You're supposed to suspend disbelief, and that's something people were more willing to do in the 80s and 90s. Now people are way more cynical when it comes to movies. They know what movies are supposed to be. They have an idea of the movies that they like and they don't like, and unfortunately, I think this is a movie that for a lot of people, they would not sit and enjoy. I mean, I can just see younger people rolling their eyes every time Sean Penn's character shows his distaste towards cell phones. And that's something I was really wondering while watching the movie. Is this a movie that only people who really like movies is going to like? Because I can't see a younger audience coming on board with a movie like this, because it's kind of cynical towards the cell phone behavior, towards being on your phone, towards people's attitudes towards relationships. I mean, this movie does feel kind of judgy towards modern times. And my other take on this movie is that it only works because of who the stars in the movie are. Like, if the Clark character wasn't played by Sean Penn or somebody of that caliber, I wouldn't have been that interested in this movie. Not to say that there isn't an interesting conversation being had in the taxi, not to say the movie isn't interesting except for the actors, but that's why I watched this movie, because it starred Sean Penn and because I have a history of watching Sean Penn movies and characters. I think it's the whole reason the movie needs somebody like Sean Penn, because he has an entire backstory you never get to see, so it has to be believable when the words come out of his mouth what his life was like before this drive. The same with Dakota Johnson. I mean, it's totally important for the movie to have believable arcs for these characters, and the actors themselves really have to sell those arcs, and I do think they get there somehow. I think it's a little clunky. I don't think it's a perfect movie. The conversation is a little too convenient, and you'll understand what I'm saying once you see the movie. It's just the perfect marriage between star and movie. I mean, Sean Penn needed to be in a movie like this. He needs to be in movies that reminds people why he's one of the best actors working today. I mean, we are talking about a two-time Oscar-winning actor, but he isn't as relevant as he once was because the movies that he used to make used to be the popular movies. Mystic River, Milk. Now the popular movies are superhero movies, Star Wars movies, big franchise movies, and I don't think Sean Penn is going to show up in a Marvel movie as an evil senator. That's not going to happen. So the movies that are available to him right now are movies like Daddio, and he crushes in this movie. And if this movie came out 15 years ago, I would guarantee it would get Sean Penn really big Oscar consideration for Best Leading Actor. Now, call me cynical, I don't think he has any chance for any awards recognition for this performance. The movie is too small, it didn't make a lot of money, and not enough people have seen this film. It's not a movie that has really hit the zeitgeist. Just being Sean Penn and waking up doesn't get you an Oscar nomination anymore, and I'm not saying it should, but I do believe he deserves some Oscars recognition for this performance. I don't know if by the end of the year I'm going to look at this movie as one of the top 5 best performances from a male leading actor. I don't even necessarily believe it's one of the best performances of Sean Penn's career. I'm just saying it's one of the best of the year so far, and it's just a reminder of how good Sean Penn can be when given really good stuff to work with. And yes, you can call this an imperfect movie. I would. I think it is imperfect. I don't think it's a great movie, but I think it's one of those signature Sean Penn things that he does, is that he gives a near perfect performance in an imperfect movie. Like, I don't think Sean Penn has been in what I would call an all-time great movie. I really like Mystic River, I really like Milk, but again, those movies aren't on those levels of The Godfather or those other classics. I also think that hurts Sean Penn's argument when it comes to who is the best actor of all time, because he doesn't have that great filmography. But when you really go back and watch most of his performances, he's great even in some not so great movies. You really don't get a lot of movies like this nowadays, like a two-hander, like a true two-hander. I was even thinking about more recent two-handers. We can talk about The Lighthouse with Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe. That is a true two-hander. That movie is carried by those two. But that movie also has some horror, mystical elements to it. So it's not as straightforward as Daddio. The other movie I was thinking about was Malcolm and Marie, but that's a different movie as well, because that's a movie about two people who really know each other well. That's a movie about a relationship. It's a couple having a heated conversation. You really can't compare that to Daddio. I mean, Daddio is a movie about two strangers having a heartfelt conversation. I think this is a tricky movie to talk about, because on one hand, I look at it and I go, why don't people want movies about real human beings? But then I ask the question, are the characters in Daddio real human beings? Like, could I ever see a taxi cab driver and a young woman have a conversation like this? And I have to be honest, I do kind of find it hard to believe, but should that matter whatsoever? I mean, I'm only judging the movie based on the merit of the acting in it. And again, I think Sean Penn gives a great performance. Dakota Johnson is really good as well, yet not a lot of people saw this movie in theaters. It made less than $1 million. I mean, that's kind of crazy to think about. Could you imagine a movie starring Sean Penn coming out in 2005 making under $1 million? But here we are, and it says something about the state of the movie business that one of its premier actors isn't a hit maker anymore. Now again, you could argue, was Sean Penn ever really a hit maker? No, but he was in some movies that a lot of people went to go see in movie theaters. And Johnson herself has been in some more recent hits. This is one of those movies that makes you wonder, does star power mean anything anymore? And I still do believe in the movie star. I just think it has something to do with where these two movie stars are at the moment. I believe if Madam Web were a big hit and Dakota Johnson was getting rave reviews for her performance in that really bad movie, then a lot of people would have gone and seen a movie like Daddio, because they would want to go, oh, what is that actress doing next? But because that movie bombed, Daddio doesn't really have a chance. And maybe it never really had a chance to begin with, because it's not an event movie. And I really do hate that term, an event movie. I don't like it when people said I didn't go see that movie because it didn't feel like an event or it didn't feel like a blockbuster. I like all kinds of movies. I like big blockbusters and I like smaller, more intimate films such as Daddio. I think the world needs both of these kinds of movies, and I think they should both be able to have good runs in movie theaters. I'm not asking for Daddio to make $100 million, but I liked when we used to live in a world where this movie could make a decent $5 million and some people would talk about it. Now these movies become irrelevant. And I even ask myself sometimes, should I even be talking about a movie like Daddio that not a lot of people even know exists? But then I say to myself, no, I want to talk about this movie because of the actors in it and the interesting performances. And yes, I still want to live in a world where it is a big deal that Sean Penn is in a movie. And here's a scary thought. What movie star could be in this movie to make it a hit? I don't know if one exists. Like if George Clooney was the star of Daddio with Dakota Johnson, would that have any meaning towards anyone? George Clooney is a bigger blockbuster star, more so than Sean Penn, yet I don't even know if the movie makes $1 million if it's George Clooney as the taxi cab driver. I just think we're in a weird place with what movies are playing in movie theaters. For instance, I wanted to see Daddio in movie theaters, but I had to wait for it to be on VOD because no movie theater near me was playing this film. And the same thing has happened with Kinds of Kindness, which stars a 2-time Oscar winner in Emma Stone, who is starring in a movie with the director who just got her second Oscar, yet I couldn't find that movie anywhere near me. That's really weird for the movie business. I get it. You want to sell these big blockbusters and you want them to make $1 billion. There can be these movies in between, and they can also be profitable if you just put the movie movies in almost every movie theater and give the movies a chance to breathe and exist. I hear people all the time say that Jaws played in movie theaters for a year and so did Back to the Future. I don't think we should live in that world. I just believe that we should live in a world where almost every movie theater plays an interesting, smaller movie. That's all I'm asking for. Like, I didn't even have a chance to see Daddio in a movie theater. So why should I be surprised it didn't even make $1 million? You didn't give me a chance to see the movie. It's not that everyone is saying, no, I don't want that movie, although I know those people do exist. Well, I know that Daddio isn't a movie for everyone, but you're not even giving the people who want to see Daddio a chance to see the movie Daddio. And that's when I'm like, well, if you're not even going to give me the chance to see the movie in movie theaters, just put it on a streaming service. Put it on Netflix, put it on HBO Max. Like, you can't have it both ways. Oh, you can't see the movie near you ever, and it's not going to be on a streaming service until 100 days from now. Like, you have to give me a chance to see the movie so that somebody can see the movie, because clearly not enough people are seeing the movie Daddio. Sorry for the little rant there, but I think it needed to be said because I just don't know how to feel about these movies, Daddio and Kinds of Kindness. Yes, they're not making a lot of money in movie theaters, but also movie theaters aren't playing these movies. So what am I supposed to do with that information? Getting back to Sean Penn's love-hate relationship with the art of acting, this has to be part of the hatred of it, is that he probably worked really hard to do this performance and then nobody is talking about this movie, and that must be a frustrating thing. I know this is a guy who's been rewarded enough. He's a 2-time Oscar-winning actor, but the types of movies he's making now are not the ones that are talked about by the public at large. So in some ways that must feel like a rejection, and yet you're rejecting him and you're also asking him questions like, why haven't you acted a lot in the past 10 years? Because the movies you're seeing, the Marvel movies, the Batmans, I'm guilty of it too. Those are mostly the movies I go and see in movie theaters. I do try to see the other smaller movies, but those are the ones. Those are the popular movies. A lot of people saw the movie Twisters because a lot of people were talking about the movie Twisters. Everyone saw Barbie and Oppenheimer because everyone was talking about going to see Barbie and Oppenheimer. My point is, it's kind of wild to reject the movies that the man makes and then to ask him, well, why don't you love to make movies anymore? I also feel worse for Dakota Johnson for this movie than I do about Madam Web. I mean, Madam Web is a mess. It was never going to work out for her. But for people not to see this movie where she's actually good, she must have thought, I'm going to be in this movie with Sean Penn. It's going to get me a lot of appreciation and possible accolades. And that's just not going to happen because, again, no one has seen this movie. I'm not saying Daddio is a masterpiece. Again, I don't believe it is. It's an imperfect film. I think it's a really interesting film. I think the selling point of the movie is its 2 stars. Sean Penn is doing some of the best acting he's done in the last 10 years, and so is Dakota Johnson. Like, Dakota Johnson clearly wanted to be in a movie with one of the greats, and she stepped up her game. You hope a movie like this gets a second life. Like, you just hope that people find this movie, see this movie, appreciate this movie. I would love to be wrong. I would absolutely love for Sean Penn to get an Oscar nomination for his performance in Daddio. But right now, as it stands, I believe there's a 0.0% chance of that happening. It's just not going to happen because it hasn't gotten enough eyeballs on it, and there are no real conversations being had about it. In closing, why I wanted to do a podcast on this movie is to talk about Sean Penn. He's not a figure I've said a lot about because he hasn't made a lot of movies recently. So when I saw that he was going to make a movie with Dakota Johnson, I said to myself, I'm going to see this movie and I'm hopefully going to cover it on this podcast, and I'm really glad he did. Sean Penn is one of the all-time great actors. Thanks for listening to this edition of Pop Culture Spotlight. I'm Cameron McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I recommend you check out Daddio. Next week on the podcast, I'm talking about the film Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, so tune into that and please rate, review, and subscribe.